A woman found a body in her field at first light. She'd gone out to check her fence line, and there he was, face down in the frozen grass, not moving. She thought he was dead. Then she saw the blood soaked through the back of his coat, and she saw his hand twitch, and she knew he wasn't dead yet. But close. She should have left him. A stranger, shot, half frozen, was nothing but trouble for a woman alone with 2 children. Any sensible person would have turned around and walked away. She didn't. She grabbed him under the arms and started dragging. Her name was Clara Bishop, a widow so poor she wasn't sure how she'd feed her own children through the coming winter, let alone a dying stranger. Why she saved that man, and what he did for her children after, is a story worth hearing. Stay with me. Clara Bishop knew hard living the way some people know a language they were raised in. She was 32 years old, and she had a small worn-down homestead at the edge of nowhere, and she had 2 children, and she had almost nothing else. Her husband, Daniel, had been gone 2 years now. A wagon accident, sudden and stupid and final, the kind of thing that takes a healthy man in an afternoon and leaves a family broken behind him. One day Clara had a husband and a partner and someone to share the weight. The next day she had a fresh grave on the hill and 2 little ones looking up at her, waiting to be told everything was going to be all right. She'd told them it would be. She wasn't sure she believed it. Because here is the truth of what Clara Bishop was facing. The homestead had never been much, and without Daniel to work it, it was slipping away a little more every season. She had a few chickens, a milk cow, a garden she fought the weather for, and 40 acres of hard ground that had never made anybody rich. She did every bit of the work herself now, the planting, the mending, the hauling, the animals, and she did it on 2 little sleep and 2 little food, because whatever food there was went to the children first. The children were the whole reason she got up in the morning. Her daughter Emma was 8, a serious, watchful girl who had grown up too fast the day her father died, and who tried so hard to help that it broke Clara's heart. And her son, little Jacob, was 5, still young enough to laugh easy, still young enough that Clara fought like the devil to keep his world safe, so he could stay a child a little longer. She would have done anything for those 2. That was simply the fact at the center of Clara Bishop's life. Anything. Money was the constant terror. There was a debt on the land, back taxes mostly, piled up since Daniel died, and Clara had been paying it down a few dollars at a time, selling eggs and butter and doing mending for the better-off families in the valley. But she was always behind. Always one bad month from disaster. And winter was coming, the hard high-country winter, which meant months when nothing grew and nothing sold and a family just had to survive on what it had put by. There was a man in town, too, who made it all worse, a land agent named Pruitt who worked for the county, and who had taken to riding out to Clara's homestead every few weeks to remind her, in that oily patient way of his, exactly how far behind she was and exactly what would happen when the county finally lost its patience. He'd sit on his horse and look at her land the way a man looks at something he already owns, and he'd tell her there were parties interested, that she'd be doing her children a kindness to sell now and move to town, that a woman alone had no business trying to hold 40 acres. Clara had come to dread the sight of him more than she dreaded the winter itself. Because Pruitt was the future, circling, patient, certain. And she had no answer for him. Clara had not put by nearly enough. She knew it. She lay awake at night doing the math, the same terrible math over and over, and it never came out right. So on that cold gray morning, when she walked out to check her fence and found a half-dead stranger bleeding in her field, Clara Bishop had every reason in the world to keep walking. She had nothing to spare. Not food, not medicine, not time, not safety. A wounded stranger, a man who'd clearly been shot, which meant a man tangled up in something violent, was the last thing on earth a woman alone with 2 children needed. He could be an outlaw. He could bring the men who shot him right to her door. He could die on her floor and leave her with a body to explain. Every practical bone in her body told her to turn around. But Clara Bishop had knelt at a fresh grave 2 years ago and learned something about death that she couldn't unlearn. She knew what it was to lose someone. She knew what it was to wish with everything in you that somebody could have done something. And she could not look at a living man, breathing, his hand twitching in the frozen grass, and just walk away and let him die alone in the cold. So she didn't. She got her arms under his and she dragged him, and he was a big man, it took everything she had, across the frozen field, and up onto her porch and into her small warm house. Her children stood back wide-eyed as their mother hauled a bleeding stranger through the door. "Emma," Clara said, breathing hard, "boil water. Jacob, bring me every clean cloth we've got. Move now, both of you." And Clara Bishop got to work trying to save the life of a man whose name she did not know. She had no idea that in dragging that stranger out of the cold, she had just changed the entire course of her children's lives. The bullet had gone clean through his side, which was the only lucky thing about it. Clara had seen wounds before, farm life is full of them, and she cleaned this one and packed it and bound it as best she could, and then she sat back and understood that the wound wasn't going to be what killed him. The fever was. He'd been out in the cold too long, and he'd lost too much blood, and by that first night he was burning up, soaked in sweat, shaking, talking to people who weren't there. Clara sat up with him through the whole night, and the next, and the one after that. She had no medicine. What she had was cold well water and clean cloths and the stubborn refusal to let one more person die if she could help it. She bathed his forehead. She dripped water and thin broth between his cracked lips. She kept the fire going and kept him warm and kept watch. For 3 days he hung between living and dying. And on the 4th day, the fever finally broke. His eyes opened. They were clear for the first time. He looked around the small strange room, at the low fire, at the woman sitting exhausted in the chair beside him, and Clara watched him try to work out where he was and how he'd gotten there. "Easy," she said. "Don't try to move. You've been shot, and you've had a fever near a week. You're safe. You're in my house." He stared at her. His voice, when it came, was a dry rasp. "Why? Why what? Why'd you help me? You don't know me." Clara considered that. "No," she said. "I don't." "Figured that could wait till you were alive to introduce yourself." Something moved across his face at that. Not quite a smile. But something. His name, she learned slowly over the next few days, was Jesse. Just Jesse at first. He was a long time offering a last name, and Clara didn't push. She'd been right that he was a man tangled in something. But she'd also had time now, days of it, watching him sleep and watching him wake, and her read on him had changed. Whatever Jesse was, he wasn't a bad man. She'd nursed enough of the fever talk out of him to know that much. A man shows you who he is when he's out of his head, and what came out of Jesse in his fever wasn't cruelty. It was grief. He'd called out names. He'd apologized to people who weren't there. Whatever he was running from, it was sorrow, not wickedness. So Clara let him heal. And as the days became weeks, and Jesse got slowly stronger, something began to shift in that little house. At first he just watched. He was a quiet man, guarded, careful, a man clearly not used to kindness and not sure what to do with it. He watched Clara work herself to the bone from dawn to dark. He watched her give the biggest portion of every meal to her children and take the smallest for herself. He watched little Jacob warm up to him with a child's easy trust, and he watched serious Emma keep her careful distance, protecting her mother with her eyes. He saw all of it. And Clara could tell that what he was seeing was landing somewhere deep. As he got stronger, he started to help, in small ways at first, then in bigger ones. He couldn't do much with a healing hole in his side, but he could sit at the table and mend harness. He could sharpen every tool she owned until they cut like new. He talked Emma through fixing the coop latch that had been broken for a month, patient and easy, never taking the job from her, just guiding her hands until she'd done it herself and stood back proud. One afternoon Clara came in from the field to find Jesse teaching Jacob how to whittle a little horse out of a scrap of pine, the boy's tongue stuck out in concentration, Jesse's big scarred hands guiding the small ones. She stood in the doorway watching them, and something in her chest ached so hard she had to turn away. Because that was a thing the children had been missing. A man's patient attention. And she hadn't even let herself know how much until she saw it. Because Jesse was seeing what Clara's life actually was. The bone-deep exhaustion. The children she was raising alone. The homestead falling down around her faster than one woman could hold it up. And little by little, the fear underneath all of it. The fear she tried to hide from her children and couldn't quite hide from a man lying still and watchful in her main room all day. One evening, when he was strong enough to sit up, Jesse finally asked her about it. Direct, the way he was. "You're behind on this place," he said. "Aren't you? Taxes, or a note? Something." Clara stiffened. "That's not your concern." "No," he agreed. "It's not. But I've got eyes." He looked at her steady. "How bad?" And Clara, who had not spoken the truth of it out loud to another adult in 2 years, who had carried the whole crushing weight of it entirely alone, something in her just gave. She sat down at the table across from this quiet stranger, and she told him. The back taxes. How far behind she was. The winter coming. The math that never came out right no matter how many times she did it. She told him she had maybe 2 months before the county came for the land, and nowhere to go if they did, and 2 children depending on her to figure out something she could not figure out. Jesse listened to all of it without a word. And when she was done, he was quiet for a long moment. "How much?" he said. "To make it right. Clear the taxes, get you square." Clara laughed, tired. "More than exists in this house. More than I'll see in a year." "Why? You planning to rob a bank for me?" She'd meant it as a joke. Jesse didn't laugh. He just looked into the fire, and something settled in his face, some decision she couldn't read. "Get some sleep, Clara," he said quietly. "You look like you haven't in years." And for a little while, it seemed like maybe things could just be calm. Jesse was healing. The children liked having him there. The house felt less empty. For the first time in 2 years, Clara wasn't carrying it entirely alone, even if it was just a wounded stranger sitting by her fire. She let herself, just for a few nights, exhale. She should have known better. Because the men who'd put a bullet in Jesse hadn't forgotten about him. And 3 days later, they rode up to Clara Bishop's homestead. There were 3 of them, and they rode up mid-morning like they had every right to be there. Clara was in the yard when they came, and everything in her went cold at the sight of them. She knew the type on sight: hard men, armed men, the kind of men who did other men's dirty work for pay. The one in front, lean and mean with a scar through one eyebrow, tipped his hat at her with a mockery of politeness. "Morning, ma'am. We're looking for a man. Big fella, would have been hurt bad. Shot. We heard tell he might have turned up out this way." He smiled without any warmth at all. "You wouldn't have seen anybody like that, would you?" And here is the moment the whole thing changed. Because Clara understood in a rush exactly what was happening. These were the men who'd shot Jesse. They'd tracked him here. And they had not come to make sure he was all right. They'd come to finish the job, and now they were standing in her yard, between her and her children, asking after a man she'd spent 3 weeks keeping alive. This was no longer about nursing a stranger back to health. This was about 3 killers on her land, and 2 children in that house, and whatever Jesse had done or hadn't done to bring these men down on all of them. Now listen, if you're pulling for Clara and her kids the way I am, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Because what happened next is the whole reason I had to tell you this story. Now stay with me. Clara's mind raced, but her face stayed calm. Years of hiding fear from her children had taught her how to hold steady. "I've seen no one," she said. "It's just me and my little ones out here. And I'll thank you not to frighten them, so state your business or move along." The scarred man's smile thinned. He didn't believe her. He swung down off his horse. "Mind if we take a look around? Just to be neighborly." And that's when the cabin door opened. Jesse stepped out onto the porch. He was still pale, still moving careful from the wound in his side. But he'd gotten himself upright, and he'd found his gun belt, and he stood there in the doorway with a steadiness that made all 3 of those men go still. Clara's heart stopped. She'd spent weeks learning the gentle, quiet man who sat by her fire. This was someone else. This was the man underneath. Cold and hard and dangerous. "You're looking for me, Cole," Jesse said to the scarred man. "So here I am. But you're going to want to think real careful about what you do next. Because you're standing on this woman's land, and she's got nothing to do with our business, and if one of you so much as looks wrong at her or those children, I will put all 3 of you in the ground before you clear leather. You know I can." The scarred man, Cole, had gone tense. "You're hurt, Jesse. You're one man and you're shot, and there's 3 of us." "I've done more with worse," Jesse said. "Question is whether Harlan's paying you enough to die in a dirt yard over it. Because that's the price today. You go back and you tell Harlan I'm done running. He wants what I took from him, he can come get it himself, and he can find out what I found out, that I'm a whole lot harder to kill than he thought." His eyes were flat and certain. "Now get off this woman's land." For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Clara stood frozen, her children's faces at the window behind Jesse, 3 armed men in her yard, and 1 wounded man holding the whole thing together with nothing but nerve. Clara's whole body screamed at her to run to her children, but she made herself stand still, because she understood, watching Jesse, that any sudden move might be the thing that set it off. So she held. She held the way she'd held for 2 years, steady on the outside, terrified underneath, because there were children counting on her not to break. And the nerve held. Cole was a hired man, and hired men do their arithmetic. Dying today, 4 wages, over a fight that had just gotten a lot less certain. It didn't add up. He backed toward his horse, eyes never leaving Jesse. "This ain't over," Cole said. "No," Jesse agreed. "But it's over for today. Ride." They rode. Clara watched the dust of them disappear down the road, and only then did she start shaking. Jesse lowered himself carefully onto the porch step, gray-faced, the effort of standing having cost him more than he'd let the men see. And Clara rounded on him, fear coming out as anger the way it does. "Who are you?" she demanded. "What did you bring to my door, Jesse? I've got children in that house." And so, finally, he told her the truth. All of it. His name was Jesse Cade. And the men who'd shot him worked for a man named Harlan Voss. Voss was a rich man 2 counties over, a cattleman and a crook, the kind who dressed his greed up in fine clothes and owned enough lawmen to do as he pleased. Jesse had worked for him once. Not as a gunman exactly, but as the man who knew where the bodies were buried, so to speak, a man Voss trusted with his business, until the day Jesse saw one thing too many. Voss had cheated and ruined a small rancher, an old man Jesse had liked, driven him to his death over a debt as crooked as Voss himself. And Jesse, who had spent a long time telling himself that what his boss did was none of his concern, had finally reached the end of what he could stomach. So he'd taken something. On his way out, Jesse had taken a strongbox, Voss's private ledger, the real one, the book that laid out every crooked deal and stolen deed and bought lawmen in 2 counties. Enough evidence to hang Harlan Voss, or at the very least to ruin him and free every family he had his boot on. Jesse had taken it meaning to get it to a federal marshal, an honest one, far outside Voss's reach. He hadn't made it. Voss's men had caught up with him, and shot him, and left him for dead in the cold, but not before he'd hidden the strongbox where they couldn't find it. That was what they wanted. That was why they hadn't just killed him outright and been done. They needed to know where that ledger was. So that's what I brought to your door, Jesse finished quietly. I'm sorry, Clara. I never meant to. I'd have died in that field and taken it with me before I'd have brought Voss down on you and these kids on purpose. Clara was quiet for a long moment, taking it all in. That ledger, she finally said. The one that can bring this Voss down. Where is it? And Jesse looked at her, really looked at her, this woman who dragged him out of the frozen grass and given him the biggest share of food she couldn't spare and sat up 3 nights running to keep a stranger alive. That, he said, is the thing I've been lying here 3 weeks thinking about. Because Jesse had made a decision. And now he told her what it was. He was strong enough now to ride. He could take that ledger, slip out of the county, and finally get it to the honest marshal he'd been trying to reach, and in doing so, bring down Harlan Voss for good. But Jesse had come to see, lying in that house watching Clara fight her losing battle, that Voss ruining that old rancher was the same story as Clara about to lose her homestead. Rich, powerful men, taking everything from good people too alone to fight back. And Jesse had spent his whole life on the wrong side of that. Working for the Vosses of the world. Looking away. Not anymore. There's a reward, Jesse said. For evidence against Voss. A big one, the Cattlemen's Association and the territory both, they've wanted him for years, they just never had proof. That ledger's worth more money than you've ever seen, Clara. And it's not mine. Not really. It belongs to everybody that man ever hurt. He looked at her steady. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to finish this. I'm going to get that book to the marshal and put Harlan Voss where he belongs. And that reward money is going to clear your taxes, and fix this homestead, and put food by for these children for every winter to come. All of it. That's where it goes. Clara stared at him. Jesse, I can't take. You dragged me out of a frozen field and saved my life for nothing, Jesse said. For no reason but that you couldn't stand to watch a man die. You've got no idea, Clara, what it does to a man like me to be shown that kind of thing. To find out there's still people in the world who'll do that. His voice was rough. Let me do this. Let me be, just once, the kind of man who does right instead of the kind who looks away. Let me do it for you, and for those 2 kids. Please. He rode out the next morning, still not fully healed, carrying the recovered strongbox and the whole valley's worth of hope. And for 2 weeks, Clara heard nothing, and feared the worst. Then, on a cold clear afternoon, a rider came up the road. Not Voss's men. A federal marshal, with papers in his hand and news to deliver. Harlan Voss was under arrest. The ledger had been everything Jesse promised, and more. Voss's crooked empire was coming down. And there was, the marshal told a stunned Clara Bishop, the matter of a reward. A very substantial reward. Which one Jesse Cade had directed in full and in writing, to be paid to the widow Clara Bishop, for services rendered to the territory. Clara sat down on her porch step and wept. The money changed everything, the way she'd never let herself even dream it could. The back taxes were cleared in a single afternoon, the debt that had hung over Clara like a storm cloud for 2 years simply gone. Clara took particular satisfaction in one small thing. She paid it in person at the county office, and she made sure the land agent Pruitt was there to see her do it. He'd ridden out to her homestead so many times to circle her land like a buzzard and tell her a woman alone had no business holding 40 acres. Now she laid the money on the counter, cleared every cent she owed, and watched his oily certainty curdle into something small and sour. She didn't gloat. She just looked him in the eye, tipped her head, and walked out a free woman on her own land. It was, she'd admit later, one of the finest moments of her life. And there was enough left to repair the homestead properly, a new roof, mended fences, the barn made sound. Enough to buy more stock, so the little farm could actually make a living instead of just barely losing one. And enough, most precious of all, to put real food by for the winter, so that for the first time since Daniel died, Clara Bishop did not lie awake doing desperate math. Her children would be warm. Her children would be fed. The wolf was finally away from the door. But if you think the money was the thing that mattered most in this story, then you haven't been paying attention. Because it wasn't. Because Jesse came back. He didn't have to. He'd done what he set out to do. He'd squared his debt with the world, brought down Voss, seen to it that the woman who saved him was taken care of. He could have ridden on, a free man with a clean conscience at last, the way drifters do. Clara told herself that was what he'd do. She told herself not to hope. She'd learned about hope. But 3 weeks after the marshal came, on a bright cold morning, Jesse Cade rode back up that road. And this time he wasn't running from anything, and he wasn't bleeding, and he wasn't a stranger. He got down off his horse in the yard where Clara had once dragged his half-dead body, and little Jacob came flying off the porch yelling his name, and even serious Emma broke into a run, and Jesse caught them both up, and Clara stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth. "Figured you could use another pair of hands," Jesse said to her, over the children's heads. "If you'll have one. I'm done wandering, Clara. Spent my whole life looking for something and never knowing what it was. Turns out it was this. A place. People to do right by." He looked at her. "You gave me my life back. Let me spend it here. Earning it." And Clara Bishop, who had lost so much, who had carried so much alone for so long, walked down off that porch and into the arms of the man she'd saved. They were married in the spring. Jesse became the husband Clara had thought she'd never have again, and more than that, far more than that, he became a father to 2 children who had lost theirs. He taught Jacob to ride and to fish and to whittle. He earned serious Emma's careful trust slowly, patiently, day by day, until the morning she called him Pa without thinking about it and then looked startled at herself, and Jesse had to walk out to the barn so nobody would see a grown man cry. He worked that homestead into something Daniel Bishop would have been proud of. And he loved Clara the way she deserved to be loved, steadily, gratefully, all the way down. Years later, the children grown, Clara would sometimes tell the story of how it all began. How she'd walked out one frozen morning to check a fence, and found a dying stranger in her field, and had every good reason in the world to leave him there. "And what if you had?" someone would always ask. And Clara would look across the room at Jesse, gray now, still hers, and she'd smile. "That's just it," she'd say. "I nearly did. The whole world tells you to walk past the stranger in the field. Protect your own. Keep what little you've got. And I almost listened." She'd shake her head. "But you never know, do you, who a person really is when they're face down in the grass. You never know that the man you stop to save might just be the one who saves you right back." She'd reach for Jesse's hand. "I went out that morning to check a fence," she'd say. "And I found my whole family lying in the frost. I just didn't know it yet.